The purple crayon moved across the paper in careful strokes, creating a figure with sharp lines where a smile should have been. Ruby Bennett sat cross-legged on the living room floor of their Burlington apartment, her small fingers gripping the crayon with the intensity of a child who knew exactly what she wanted to say. The drawing showed a woman in a business suit, tall and angular, with empty space where her mouth belonged. Marcus Bennett watched from the kitchen doorway, dish towel draped over his shoulder, the scent of Friday night spaghetti still lingering in the air. He'd learned to read his daughter's art the way other fathers learned to decode report cards. Purple meant memory. Purple meant Linda. But this woman wasn't Linda. His phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. Vermont area code. He let it ring through to voicemail while he moved to sit beside Ruby, close enough to see the details she'd added. A briefcase, high heels, windows behind the figure suggesting an office tower. "Who's that, Ruby Bean?" She didn't look up from her work, adding shadowy lines beneath the woman's eyes. "The lady with no smile. Do we know her?" "Not yet." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, his phone erupted again. Same number. He stood, walked back to the kitchen, and answered with the clipped professionalism he reserved for potential clients. "Marcus Bennett." "Mr. Bennett, this is Jennifer Hale calling from Hartford Properties. We have an urgent situation requiring immediate structural assessment." He glanced at the clock. 4:47 on a Friday afternoon. The November sky outside his window had already begun its slide toward dark. "I'm afraid my schedule is full until next Wednesday. I can refer you to... Ms. Hartford is willing to pay triple your standard rate. We need you tonight." Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the street below where brown leaves tumbled across the pavement, driven by wind that carried the smell of approaching weather. The forecast had been running on loop all day. Hurricane Patricia upgraded to Category 3, barreling up the coast with Burlington directly in its projected path. "I don't work during weather emergencies, Ms. Hale. Liability issues aside, it's not safe. The assessment needs to happen before the storm hits. The property is a historic lakehouse on Champlain. If we don't get a certified report before the hurricane makes landfall, the insurance claim becomes significantly more complicated." Marcus understood the real message. They wanted documentation of pre-storm condition, proof that any damage wasn't from pre-existing structural failure. It was sensible, actually, but it didn't change his answer. "My daughter has a cardiology appointment Monday morning. I don't take jobs that might expose her to unnecessary stress or risk." "I'm sorry." He ended the call, returned to Ruby. She'd moved on to a new drawing, this one showing a house beside water, rendered in the same purple that marked everything important in her small world. The phone rang a third time. Different number. He almost ignored it, but something about the persistence made him answer. "Mr. Bennett." The voice was female, colder than the assistant's had been, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is Claire Hartford. I own the property Jennifer called about. I understand you have concerns about your daughter's health." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He didn't appreciate strangers knowing details about Ruby's condition, even though he knew it was a matter of public record thanks to insurance paperwork and medical billing. "Ms. Hartford, I appreciate the situation, but name your price." The words came flat, transactional. Marcus looked down at Ruby, at the purple crayon still moving across paper, at the medication reminder stuck to his refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a heart, at the photo of Linda on the bookshelf, frozen at 34 before the cancer had carved her down to something fragile. "My daughter has a heart condition and a doctor's appointment Monday morning. I have dignity, Ms. Hartford. You can't buy that." Silence stretched across the line, long enough that Marcus wondered if she'd hung up. Then her voice came back, different somehow. Less ice, more calculation. "Bring her. I'll arrange for Dr. Sarah Chen from Burlington Pediatric Cardiology to meet you at the property this evening. Your daughter gets her checkup 3 days early. You complete the assessment afterward. Everyone's schedule stays intact." Marcus moved to the window again, this time seeing his own reflection in the darkening glass. 38 years old, shoulders that still carried the frame from his college football days, close-cropped hair starting to show gray at the temples. A man who'd spent 3 years learning to be both mother and father to a 6-year-old who drew pictures of sadness in shades of purple. The offer wasn't about money. It was about solving the actual problem. And that was harder to refuse. "Where's the property?" "North shore of Lake Champlain, Shelburne. I'll text you the address. I need the checkup completed first before any assessment work begins." "Agreed. Dr. Chen will be there at 6:30. And I want it clear that if the weather deteriorates before I finish, we leave. No argument." "Understood." He looked at Ruby again. She'd put down the crayon and was watching him with those dark eyes that saw too much, understood too much. Linda's eyes right down to the way they seemed to hold questions she was too polite to ask. "We'll be there by 6:15. The address came through as he ended the call. He pulled up the map, saw the blue pin dropped on a stretch of shoreline 30 minutes north. Ruby appeared beside him, standing on tiptoe to see his phone screen. "Is that where the lady with no smile lives?" Something cold moved through Marcus's chest. He crouched down to eye level with his daughter. "What makes you think that?" She held up her latest drawing, the purple house by the water. "I saw it, in my head, like when I see Mommy sometimes." Marcus had learned not to dismiss these moments. Ruby had been 3 when Linda died, old enough to remember, young enough that the memories came wrapped in something that felt like magic. Dreams that turned out to be accurate. Knowing that called before the phone rang, Linda had been the same way, called it intuition. The doctors called it coincidence. Marcus had stopped trying to categorize it and just accepted that his daughter existed slightly outside the normal boundaries of perception. "We're going there so a doctor can check your heart. Then Daddy has to look at the house's bones." "The foundation." "That's right. Will the lady with no smile be there?" "Probably." Ruby considered this, then carefully gathered her drawings and carried them to her room. Marcus heard the rustle of paper being filed away in the box she kept under her bed, the one that held all her purple crayon memories of Linda alongside new observations of a world she was learning to navigate without a mother. He packed quickly. His inspection bag stayed ready by the door, moisture meter, laser level, thermal camera, flashlight, digital calipers, tablet loaded with structural analysis software. Ruby's bag took longer. Heart monitor, medication schedule, EpiPen she'd never needed but protocol demanded she carry, extra layers because her circulation struggled in cold weather. Her stuffed elephant that had belonged to Linda as a child. They were out the door by 5:50. Marcus's truck cutting through Burlington traffic that had already thinned as people hurried home ahead of the storm. The radio meteorologist's voice filled the cab, reciting wind speeds and projected rainfall totals with the enthusiasm of someone narrating a sporting event. Patricia had intensified. Landfall expected between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Sustained winds of 110 miles per hour. Ruby sat in her booster seat silent, watching the landscape change from city blocks to suburban sprawl to rural stretches where houses sat farther apart and trees grew close to the road. The lake appeared on their left, gray water churning under a sky the color of old bruises. "Daddy, why doesn't the lady smile?" Marcus checked his mirrors, keeping his speed steady despite the urgency thrumming in his veins. "I don't know, baby. Some people forget how." "Did you forget after Mommy died?" His hands tightened on the wheel. "For a while, then you reminded me." "How?" "By being you, by needing me, by showing me that sad and happy can live in the same house." She absorbed this in the way she absorbed everything, filing it away in whatever mental architecture housed her understanding of the world. The GPS announced their turn. Marcus guided the truck down a private drive lined with maples that had already lost most of their leaves. The house emerged gradually through the trees, Victorian, 1880s if he had to guess. 3 stories of weathered clapboard siding painted a gray that matched the lake beyond. Wraparound porch with ornate spindlework, turret on the northeast corner, multiple gables and a slate roof that had probably cost a fortune to maintain. The kind of house that required constant attention and rewarded it with a dignity that modern construction could never achieve. He parked in the circular drive beside a black Mercedes sedan and a white Volvo with pediatric practice decals on the rear window. The front door opened before he killed the engine. The woman who stepped onto the porch matched Ruby's drawing with unsettling accuracy. Tall, angular in a way that suggested discipline rather than genetics. Dark hair pulled back severe enough to strain credibility. Charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage. And a face that held about as much warmth as the November wind now picking up across the lake. Ruby's whisper carried clearly in the truck's interior. "It is the lady with no smile." Marcus unbuckled her, lifted her down, felt her small hand slip into his. They crossed the drive together. Claire Hartford descended the porch steps with the measured pace of someone who'd learned to make entrances. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming." He nodded, already cataloging details. The porch boards under her feet showed no deflection. The foundation visible above grade looked plumb. The window frames sat square in their openings. "Ms. Hartford, this is my daughter, Ruby." Claire's gaze dropped to the child and something flickered across her face too quickly to name. She crouched, bringing herself to Ruby's eye level, and Marcus felt his daughter's hand tighten in his. "Hello, Ruby. I'm Claire. Dr. Chen is inside waiting for you." Ruby studied her with that unnerving directness that made adults uncomfortable. "You look sad." Claire's expression froze. Marcus started to apologize, but Claire raised a hand. "I suppose I do. That's very observant. Daddy says some people forget how to smile. Did you forget?" "I think maybe I did." "It's okay. Daddy forgot too after Mommy died, but he remembered." Claire stood, her movements careful, controlled. When she looked at Marcus, he saw something raw flash through her eyes before discipline reasserted itself. "Dr. Chen is in the library, first door on the right." The interior matched the exterior's promise. Original hardwood floors in heart pine, worn smooth by generations of feet. Pocket doors with brass hardware. Crown molding that showed the hand of craftsmen who'd understood proportion and scale. The bones were magnificent. Marcus could feel it in the way sound moved through the space, in the subtle give of floorboards engineered to flex without failing. Dr. Chen was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Mid-50s, competent hands, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She greeted Ruby with the gentle respect that good pediatricians mastered, never talking down, never forcing cheerfulness. The examination took 20 minutes. Marcus stood against the far wall, watching his daughter's face for signs of discomfort while Claire hovered near the doorway, her presence a study in controlled anxiety. Dr. Chen straightened, helping Ruby button her shirt. Heart rate slightly elevated, but that's consistent with travel and new environment. The VSD shows no change from her last echo. Medication regimen seems to be managing things well. She turned to Marcus. "No concerns from my end. Continue current dosing schedule. Next follow-up in 3 months unless you notice any changes in exercise tolerance or breathing." Relief flooded through Marcus's chest. He helped Ruby with her jacket while Dr. Chen packed her equipment. "Thank you for coming out here, Doctor." "Ms. Hartford is persuasive." Dr. Chen smiled at Claire. "And generous. The donation she made to the cardiac unit this afternoon will fund 3 families' co-pays for the year." Claire's face remained neutral, but Marcus saw color rise in her cheeks. She walked Dr. Chen to the door, their voices dropping to murmurs he couldn't quite catch. Ruby tugged his sleeve. "Can I draw while you work, Daddy?" "There's a sunroom at the back of the house." Claire had returned, her voice carrying the kind of forced casualness that suggested she wasn't used to children in her space. "Plenty of light. I can set up a table." Marcus wanted to refuse, wanted to keep Ruby close, but the assessment would take him into crawl spaces and potentially onto the roof, not places for a 6-year-old. That would be helpful, thank you. Claire led them through the house. Marcus used the walk to make preliminary observations. Floors level, walls plumb, no visible cracks in the plaster. No water stains on ceilings, no musty smell suggesting moisture intrusion. Whatever structural issues Derek Sutton's letter claimed existed, they weren't obvious to initial inspection. The sunroom occupied the southwest corner, windows on 3 sides offering views of the lake now churning under increasingly hostile skies. Claire produced paper and colored pencils from somewhere, arranged them on a small table with the precision of someone who organized everything by right angles. Ruby settled in without hesitation, already reaching for purple. Marcus knelt beside her. I'll be working in different parts of the house. If you need me, you call out, loud as you can, okay? Okay, Daddy. And if your chest feels funny or you get dizzy, I tell you right away, I know. He kissed her forehead, breathed in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, then stood to find Claire watching with an expression he couldn't quite parse. Something between longing and fear. She'll be fine. Claire's words came firm, more command than reassurance. I'll check on her while you work. Marcus pulled the inspection documents from his bag. The letter from Sutton and Associates sat clipped to a structural assessment form, stamped by someone named Kyle Hammond, P.E. He scanned the claims: foundation settlement, load-bearing wall deflection, roof truss failure, moisture intrusion, the kind of comprehensive failure that suggested a house on the verge of collapse. Except everything he'd seen contradicted that narrative. Ms. Hartford, I need to ask some direct questions. She folded her arms, a defensive posture that suggested she knew what was coming. Ask. How long have you owned this property? I inherited it 2 years ago when my grandfather died. Henry Hartford, he was the original architect. And in those 2 years, have you noticed any settling? Cracks appearing? Doors that won't close properly, windows sticking? No. Any water damage? Leaks? Stains? No. When was the last professional inspection? 18 months ago. Clean report, no issues identified. Marcus held up Sutton's letter. This claims 6 inches of foundation settlement. That's catastrophic failure. That's the kind of movement that makes doors hang crooked and creates cracks you could fit your hand through. I haven't seen anything even remotely approaching that level of damage. Claire moved to the windows, her silhouette sharp against the darkening sky. Derek Sutton is my ex-fiancé. He's also senior partner at the firm that represents Hartford Properties' board of directors. My grandfather's will stipulates that if I maintain this house in its current condition for 5 years from the date of his death, I retain controlling interest in the company. If the property is condemned or demolished, the board gets voting majority. And Mr. Sutton wants that majority. Derek wants control of the company, of me. He's never been particularly good at accepting no. Marcus looked at the letter again, seeing it now for what it was. Not engineering assessment, legal weapon. When does the 5-year period end? December 1st, 4 weeks from today. And this inspection is his last chance to force my hand before the deadline. The board vote is scheduled for Monday morning. If this house fails inspection, they can declare it a liability and order demolition. My vote becomes irrelevant. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the old windows in their frames. Marcus checked his watch, 7:15. Maybe 4 hours before the storm made conditions too dangerous to work. I need to see everything. Crawl space, attic, every load-bearing wall. This is going to take time. Take what you need. He started in the basement, descending narrow stairs into a space that smelled of earth and old stone. The foundation was fieldstone, mortared with lime, the kind of construction that predated poured concrete. His flashlight beams swept across surfaces that showed the marks of hand tools, each stone selected and placed with care that modern builders had forgotten how to give. He measured, photographed, took moisture readings, found settlement of 3/10 of an inch on the northeast corner. completely normal for a structure this age. The kind of movement that happened as soil compacted and wood seasoned and a house found its equilibrium with the earth beneath it. Sutton's report claimed 6 inches, 20 times the actual measurement. Marcus worked methodically, documenting everything. The joists overhead were hand-hewn oak, 12 by 12, spaced 16 inches on center. Overkill by modern standards, but that's what happened when builders cared more about longevity than cost optimization. He checked for rot, for insect damage, for any sign of structural compromise. Found nothing. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. He emerged from the crawl space to find Claire standing at the top of the stairs holding a steaming mug. Coffee. Black. Jennifer said that's how you take it. He accepted the mug, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The coffee was good, better than good, the kind that came from beans ground fresh, not scooped from a can. Your daughter is drawing. Claire's voice carried something softer than it had before. She's very talented. She gets that from her mother. Linda was an artist, well, an art historian, but she painted. Was? Ovarian cancer. 3 years ago. Claire looked away toward the windows where darkness had fully claimed the sky. I'm sorry. Thank you. The words hung between them, inadequate and necessary. Marcus drained the coffee, handed back the mug, and moved on to the next phase of inspection. Load-bearing walls, he found them solid, plumb, showing no signs of the deflection Sutton claimed. The crown molding remained tight to the ceiling. The baseboards sat flush to the floor. The kind of details that betrayed structural movement were absent. He was starting on the second floor when the house shuddered. A sound like a cannon shot echoed from above, followed by the terrible music of wood tearing and shingles scattering. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Absolute darkness dropped over the house. Ruby's scream cut through the sudden roar of rain hitting exposed attic space. Marcus moved on instinct, flashlight already in hand, feet finding the stairs through memory of a layout he'd only just learned. The beam cut through darkness, found Claire halfway down the hall, frozen. Ruby! His daughter's voice came from the sunroom. Not hurt, scared. He reached her in seconds, scooped her up, felt her arms lock around his neck with the desperate strength of a child who'd just had the world go unpredictable. I've got you, baby, you're okay. Just a tree, just a branch. But it wasn't just a branch. The sound continued overhead, impact after impact, as wind drove rain through whatever hole had opened in the roof. Marcus carried Ruby into the hall, found Claire standing with her own flashlight now, its beam trained on the ceiling where water had begun to drip through plaster. Second floor bathroom. Her voice stayed level, controlled, but Marcus heard the tremor underneath. The tree went through above it. He set Ruby down, kept hold of her hand. Stay with Ms. Hartford, do not move from this spot. Ruby's fingers tightened in his. Daddy, I need to see how bad it is. I need you safe while I look. Can you do that for me? She nodded and he transferred her hand to Claire's. The woman looked startled, then awkward, then something that might have been determined. She crouched beside Ruby, her movements stiff but genuine. We'll wait right here, won't we, Ruby? His daughter nodded again, and Marcus moved down the hall to the bathroom door. Light spilled from under it, which made no sense until he pushed it open and saw that the light was moonlight, filtered through a hole in the roof where a massive branch had punched through shingles and decking, and now rested at an angle that suggested the primary truss had caught it before it could penetrate further. Steam rose from the bathtub, water pooled on tile. And standing in the middle of the floor, wrapped in a towel, hair soaked, was Claire Hartford. She'd been in the shower when the tree hit. Marcus's mind made the calculation automatically. 15 seconds earlier and she would have been directly under the impact point. 15 seconds and this would have been a very different kind of emergency. Their eyes met. Hers were wide, showing white all around the iris, the kind of shock that came after the body's emergency response started to fade and the brain caught up to what almost happened. The words that came out of her mouth arrived wrapped in a laugh that bordered on hysteria. Do you like what you see? Marcus forced his breathing to steady, his voice to stay calm, professional, the tone he used when Ruby woke from nightmares. I'm trying to stay calm. He moved carefully, avoiding the water, avoiding looking at anything except the structural damage overhead. Retrieved a second towel from the rack beside the sink, held it out at arm's length. Leaned forward. She did. He draped the towel over her shoulders, pulled the edges together high and secure, more insulation than intimacy. His hands stayed on fabric, never touched skin. The moment it was stable, he stepped back, restoring the buffer zone between them. The roof took a hit. Primary truss looks intact, but the secondary decking is compromised. We need to move you away from the drop zone. Claire blinked, the false bravado melting into something that looked like exhaustion painted over fear. Of course it is. Derek was right. The house is falling apart. I should just sign the papers. Marcus recognized the name. The lawyer, the ex-fiancé, the man who'd written a report claiming structural failure that didn't exist. A man who'd apparently been working to undermine Claire's confidence in her own property for long enough that even an actual emergency had her questioning reality. Derek Sutton is a suit who wouldn't know a load-bearing wall from a room divider. Can you stand? Yeah. She gripped the counter, pushed herself up. Her feet slipped on wet tile. Marcus closed the distance instinctively, extending his left forearm as a static brace. Not grabbing, offering. She gripped his wrist, fingers freezing cold against his skin. The transfer of stability was immediate. He stood perfectly still, letting her use his leverage to right herself. The moment she had balance, he stepped back. Get dressed, put on layers. The temperature's going to drop fast with that hole in the roof. I'll meet you and Ruby downstairs. He didn't wait for acknowledgement, turned and walked out, pulling the door closed behind him. Found Ruby and Claire still standing exactly where he'd left them, hands clasped. Ruby's face pale in the flashlight glow. A small voice barely above a whisper. Daddy, I saw. His stomach dropped. Saw what, baby? The lady. When you helped her, she smiled just for a second like Mommy used to smile at you. Marcus crouched, bringing himself to Ruby's eye level. Behind her, he could see Claire in the bathroom doorway, now dressed in sweatpants and a heavy sweater, rubbing a towel through her wet hair. She'd heard. He could see it in the way she'd frozen mid-motion. Miss Claire had a scary moment, Ruby Bean. I was just making sure she was okay. I know. That's what Mommy would want you to do, help people who are scared. Something in Marcus's chest cracked open. The permission he'd been afraid to even acknowledge needing. His 6-year-old daughter, who carried Linda's eyes and Linda's intuition and apparently Linda's wisdom about what came next. Claire descended the stairs slowly, careful on the wet treads. When she reached the ground floor, she looked at Ruby with an expression Marcus couldn't quite name. Thank you for waiting with me, Ruby. You were very brave. Ruby considered this seriously. Were you scared when the tree hit? Very scared. It's okay to be scared. Daddy says it means you're paying attention. Claire's laugh came unexpected, genuine, and Marcus saw it transform her face. Not beautiful exactly, but human, real. The Ice Queen facade cracking just enough to show the person underneath. Your daddy is a smart man. The wind outside hit a new pitch, throwing rain against the windows hard enough to rattle glass and frames. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, checked the weather radar. Patricia had accelerated. The hurricane was making landfall now, 2 hours ahead of schedule. The roads out would be impassable. Trees down, power lines across pavement, flash flooding in low areas. They were trapped until morning. Claire seemed to read his expression. The guest rooms are made up, 2nd floor, east wing, away from the damaged section. Marcus shook his head. We can't stay. Ruby needs to be somewhere safer. Where? Every hotel between here and Burlington is going to be full. The roads are already dangerous. Dr. Chen said Ruby shouldn't be stressed. Claire's voice stayed level, rational. This house has stood for 140 years. It's survived worse than Hurricane Patricia. The damage is localized to one section. The rest of the structure is sound. You know this. You just spent 2 hours proving it." She was right. Marcus hated that she was right, but she was. Taking Ruby out into that storm was more dangerous than staying in a house he'd just verified was structurally secure. Ruby tugged his hand. "I'm tired, Daddy. Can we stay?" The plea in her voice decided it. He looked at Claire. "One night, we leave first thing in the morning when the road's clear." Agreed. She led them upstairs to a suite of rooms that had probably housed visiting relatives back when people had live-in help and multi-generational gatherings. The bedroom held a 4-poster bed that would swallow Ruby whole. The attached bathroom had a clawfoot tub and tile work that belonged in a museum. Claire lingered in the doorway while Marcus helped Ruby change into pajamas. "There's a kitchen on the ground floor. I have supplies. Nothing fresh but canned goods. Pasta. I could make something." Marcus paused mid-button on Ruby's sleep shirt. "You don't have to do that." "I know. But you've been working for hours and Ruby needs dinner and I—" She stopped, started again. "I'd like to, if that's acceptable." Ruby looked up at Claire with those 2 knowing eyes. "Do you know how to make mac and cheese? From a box? The good kind, with the powder?" Claire's expression suggested she was being asked to decode quantum physics, but she nodded. "I can probably manage that." 20 minutes later, they sat around the kitchen island eating macaroni and cheese by the light of battery-powered lanterns Claire had produced from somewhere. The pasta was slightly overcooked and the cheese sauce was thicker than it should have been, but Ruby ate with the enthusiasm of a child who'd decided the lady with no smile might be worth knowing after all. Marcus watched Claire watch his daughter, saw the awkwardness in her posture, the uncertainty in her movements, but also something else: curiosity, tentative warmth, the first signs of ice beginning to thaw. Ruby tilted her head, studying Claire with that unnerving directness. "Miss Claire, why are you so sad?" Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "I'm not sad, Ruby." "Yes, you are. Your eyes are sad, like Daddy's eyes were after Mommy died." Marcus started to intervene, but Claire raised a hand. "My grandfather died 2 years ago. He raised me. I suppose I haven't quite figured out how to stop missing him." "Daddy says you never stop missing people. You just learn to carry it different." "Is that what your daddy says?" Ruby nodded, then looked at Marcus with perfect trust. "He says Mommy's in our hearts now instead of in the house, so we can take her with us wherever we go." Claire's eyes glistened in the lantern light. She set down her fork carefully, precisely in a way that suggested she was using the physical action to maintain control of something fragile. "That's beautiful, Ruby. Your daddy is right." They finished dinner in silence, broken only by the storm's assault on the house. Marcus cleaned the dishes while Claire awkwardly attempted to help. Neither of them quite sure how to navigate the domestic intimacy of shared space. Ruby sat at the island, drawing by lantern light, her purple crayon creating shapes Marcus couldn't quite make out. By 9 o'clock, Ruby's eyes were drooping. Marcus carried her upstairs, tucked her into the enormous bed, and was starting to read from the book he always kept in his inspection bag when she stopped him. "Can Miss Claire read tonight?" He glanced at the doorway where Claire stood, clearly having followed them up. She looked terrified. "Baby, Miss Claire doesn't have to." "I'd like to, if Ruby wants me to." Claire crossed to the bed with the careful steps of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, took the book from Marcus's hands, sat on the edge of the mattress. "I should warn you, I'm not very good at this." Ruby handed her a stuffed elephant, gray and worn from years of love. "You have to do the voices. Daddy does voices." "I'll try." Marcus stood back, watching as Claire opened the book and began to read. Her voice started stiff, formal, but Ruby interrupted within the first paragraph. "No, you have to make the elephant sound deep, like this." Ruby demonstrated with a rumbling growl that made Claire's lips twitch. "Like that?" "Better. Keep going." By the time they reached the end of the story, Claire was doing 3 distinct character voices and Ruby was giggling into her elephant. When Marcus kissed his daughter goodnight, Ruby whispered in his ear, "She smiled, Daddy. A real smile." He looked back at Claire, saw the expression on her face, and realized his daughter was right. Somewhere between the overcooked macaroni and the elephant voices, the Ice Queen had remembered how to be human. Marcus found Claire in the kitchen when he came back downstairs. She'd spread the structural documents across the island, alongside the letter from Derek Sutton. His inspection notes, photos he'd taken, the original architectural plans. "Tell me the truth. Is the house really failing?" He pulled up a stool across from her, traced a finger along the foundation measurements. "No, I found 0.3 inches of settlement on the northeast corner. That's normal. Expected. Sutton's report claims 6 inches. That's a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie. Why would Kyle Hammond sign off on something false? Money, pressure, fear, take your pick. But I can prove he never actually inspected this property. The measurements in his report are impossible. They contradict basic physics." Claire leaned forward, her wet hair falling around her face, and Marcus caught the scent of whatever shampoo she'd used. Something clean, subtle, the kind of detail he had no business noticing. Derek filed for an emergency inspection Monday morning. If the county engineer agrees with Hammond's assessment, the board can force demolition by Wednesday. Monday morning, 8 a.m. County Courthouse. Marcus checked his watch. 36 hours. Not enough time to do this properly, not nearly enough. I need to finish the inspection, document everything, write a report that's so airtight nobody can question it. He met her eyes. But I can't do that in one night. Not thoroughly. Not well enough to stand up against a motivated lawyer. Claire stood, paced to the window where rain hammered against glass with the fury of a storm that had no intention of stopping soon. "Then I've already lost." "No, you haven't lost. We're just changing the battlefield." She turned, and in the lantern light he saw something fierce flash through her expression. "What do you mean?" "Sutton's playing a legal game, using fake engineering to create artificial urgency. He's betting you'll panic, fold, accept whatever settlement he's offering." Marcus pulled a fresh legal pad from his bag, clicked his pen. "But engineering isn't opinion. It's math, physics, facts that don't care about deadlines or board votes. I'll give you those facts. In writing, certified and sealed. Professional engineer to professional engineer. When I'm done, Hammond will have to either admit he lied or explain why his math is wrong. Either way, he loses credibility." Claire moved back to the island, placed her palms flat on the surface. "You'd do that? Risk your license to fight Derek?" "I'm not risking anything. I'm doing my job, reporting what I found, the truth." He held her gaze. "But I need your help." "What do you need?" "Time, access, and complete honesty. If there's anything about this house, about Sutton, about the board dynamics I don't know, I need to know it now." Claire pulled out a stool, sat, and began to talk. The next hour spilled out in a stream of information Marcus documented with the precision he brought to structural calculations. The board composition, Sutton's relationship with each member, the financial pressures on Hartford properties, the resort development company waiting to purchase the lakefront parcel for triple its assessed value, and finally, the real truth. Derek proposed last year. I said no. He took it as a negotiating position, kept pushing, kept assuming I'd change my mind. When I made it clear I wouldn't, he shifted strategy. If he couldn't have me, he'd have the company, control what I wouldn't give him voluntarily. That's not business, that's revenge. Derek doesn't see a difference. The wind hit the house with enough force to make the structure groan. Somewhere upstairs, something rattled. Marcus's head came up, professional instinct kicking in. He grabbed his flashlight and headed for the stairs. Claire followed without being asked. They found the source quickly, the bathroom where the tree had struck. Water was coming through the ceiling faster now, pooling on tile, starting to seep into the hallway. Marcus swept his beam across the damage, calculating angles and load paths. The tarp I had in my truck, is it still there? I'll check. She returned 5 minutes later with the heavy-duty polyethylene along with his tool bag. Marcus took the stairs to the attic 2 at a time, pushed through the access hatch and emerged into a space that smelled of wet insulation and cedar. The damage was worse than he'd hoped, but better than he'd feared. The branch had punched through the roof decking, but the primary truss had indeed caught it. A temporary tarp over the exterior breach would stop the water intrusion until proper repairs could be made. He worked by flashlight, securing the tarp with battens and roofing nails, moving with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned to tune out discomfort when focus was required. The rain soaked through his clothes within minutes. The wind tried to rip the tarp from his hands, but he'd worked in worse conditions, and this was important. 40 minutes later, he climbed back down, drenched and shivering. Claire met him at the mudroom with towels and the kind of desperate relief people showed when someone they'd started to care about emerged safely from danger. "You're freezing." "I'm fine." "You're dripping on my floor." "That can be fixed." She handed him the towels, then disappeared into another room, returned with dry clothes, men's clothes. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "My grandfather's. You're about the same size." He changed in the bathroom, emerged wearing flannel and denim that smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. Found Claire in the kitchen with 2 mugs of instant coffee that steamed in the cold air. "It's terrible, but it's hot." He took the mug. Their fingers brushed, and this time neither of them pulled away immediately. The moment stretched, filled with awareness and possibility and all the complicated things that happened when 2 people who'd been alone too long found themselves in the same space for the same reason. Claire broke the silence first. "Why are you really doing this, Marcus? You could have walked away, referred me to another engineer, spent the weekend safe at home with Ruby." He looked into his coffee, seeing his own reflection distorted on its surface. "I fix things, structural problems mostly. But sometimes I just see things that are built beautifully, and I hate watching people try to tear them down because they don't understand their value." He wasn't just talking about the house. The way her breath caught told him she understood. "The storm's supposed to clear by dawn. We'll get a few hours of sleep. Then I finish the inspection and write the report. Monday morning, Derek Sutton is going to learn what happens when you weaponize engineering." Claire set down her mug, crossed to where he stood, and without warning or hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. Not romantic, not sexual, just human contact between 2 people who'd both learned to carry loneliness like a second skin. Marcus froze for a fraction of a second, then let his arms come up around her shoulders. Felt her shake with something between laughter and tears. Held her through it. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were red but clear. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for treating this like it matters." "It does matter. Your grandfather built something meant to last. That deserves respect." She studied his face in the lantern light, and he wondered what she saw. A widowed engineer with a sick kid and a stubborn streak. A man who'd spent 3 years teaching himself to be enough for a daughter who deserved the world. Someone who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to show up anyway. "Get some sleep, Claire. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She nodded, started toward the stairs, then paused. "Marcus, your daughter is remarkable." "She is. She gets that from you, not just Linda." Before he could respond, she was gone, footsteps fading up the staircase. Marcus stood in the kitchen, listening to the storm rage against walls that had survived 140 years of weather, and thought about foundations, how they bore weight, how they transferred load to earth, how the best ones were built to last not because they were rigid, but because they knew how to flex without breaking. He checked on Ruby one last time before seeking his own bed. Found her sprawled across the mattress, elephant clutched tight, breathing deep and even. Kissed her forehead, whispered the words Linda had taught him to say every night. "You are loved. You are safe. You are exactly who you're supposed to be." Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: the inspection, the report, the confrontation with Sutton and his manufactured crisis. But tonight, in this house that refused to fall, Marcus let himself believe that some things were worth fighting for, and some foundations were strong enough to bear the weight of second chances. Dawn broke gray and reluctant over Lake Champlain, the kind of light that suggested the storm had passed but left exhaustion in its wake. Marcus woke to silence, the sudden absence of wind and rain more jarring than their fury had been. His internal clock read 6:13, meaning he'd slept less than 4 hours on a guest bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud compared to his apartment's second-hand mattress. Ruby's room stood empty when he checked, the covers thrown back, her elephant missing. He found them both in the kitchen. His daughter sat at the island with Claire Hartford, who wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair still damp from a shower. They were eating toast with jam, and Ruby was explaining something with the seriousness she reserved for important matters. "So Mommy's not gone. She's just in a different place, like when you go to work and I go to school. We're in different places, but we still love each other." Claire's hands wrapped around a coffee mug, knuckles white. "That's a beautiful way to think about it. Daddy helped me understand. He says love doesn't end, it just changes addresses." Marcus cleared his throat from the doorway. Both turned, and he caught the expression on Claire's face before she could hide it. Something raw and wondering, like she'd been given access to a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Morning, Ruby Bean. You let Daddy sleep in. Miss Claire said you worked hard last night. She made me breakfast." The toast was slightly burned. The jam had been applied with more enthusiasm than precision. But Ruby ate it like it was the best meal she'd ever had, and Marcus understood. It wasn't about the food, it was about the trying. Claire poured him coffee without asking, set the mug in front of him with steady hands. "The storm cleared around 4. I checked the weather. Roads should be passable by 8. Marcus pulled up the radar on his phone. The hurricane had moved northeast, taking its worst with it. Vermont had caught the edge, enough to drop trees and knock out power, but not enough to make the landscape unrecognizable. "I need to finish the inspection. Another 3 hours minimum. Then I can write the report. I found something you should see." She led him to the library, where she'd spread more documents across the desk. The original architectural plans, yes, but also correspondence. Letters written in elegant cursive on heavy paper dated 1882 through 1885. Henry Hartford's signature appeared at the bottom of each page. "My grandfather kept everything. These are the construction notes he made while building the house. Every decision documented, every material sourced. He was meticulous." Marcus picked up a letter dated March 1883, read about the selection of oak for the foundation joists, the reasoning behind the spacing, the calculations that proved the design would support loads well beyond what the house would ever experience. "This is incredible. This is proof of engineering intent. It shows the house was overbuilt by design, not accident. There's more." She opened a leather portfolio, extracted a survey map from 1880. The property boundaries were marked in red ink. Notations in the margins detailed soil composition, water table depth, bedrock proximity, everything an engineer would need to design a foundation that would last. Marcus spread the map beside the modern survey he'd found in Claire's files. The property lines matched exactly. Nothing had changed in 140 years except the trees had grown taller and the lake had perhaps encroached a few feet during high water years. "Your grandfather knew what he was doing. He wasn't just building a house, he was building a legacy." Claire's voice came soft, threaded with grief she hadn't quite finished processing. "He died in this house, upstairs in his bedroom. Heart attack. Quick," the doctor said. "I found him the next morning." Marcus looked up from the maps, saw her struggling to maintain the composure she wore like armor. "I'm sorry. He left me everything. The house, the company, instructions that I was to preserve what he'd built. At the time I thought he meant the business. Now I think he meant both, the physical and the metaphorical. What does Hartford Properties do?" Historic preservation and adaptive reuse. We buy old buildings, restore them, find modern purposes that honor their original character. My grandfather believed architecture had responsibility to community, to history. Derek wants to pivot to luxury development, maximum profit, minimum soul. Marcus returned his attention to the documents, but his mind was calculating different equations now. This wasn't just about a house, this was about a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that valued what endured over what was profitable. I need to get to work. The more documentation I have, the stronger the report. He spent the next 3 hours in systematic examination. Started with the exterior, walking the perimeter with his moisture meter and laser level, documenting every surface, every joint, every place where water might intrude or structure might fail. The Victorian's bones revealed themselves layer by layer. He found tongue and groove siding installed with the precision of cabinetry. Window casings that fit their openings with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Trim work that showed the hand of craftsmen who understood proportion the way musicians understood harmony. Ruby followed him for the first hour, Claire trailing behind with a notepad writing down his observations. His daughter asked questions with the curiosity of someone genuinely interested in understanding how things worked. "Why do you measure everything twice, Daddy?" "Because buildings can't tell us when they're hurting. We have to listen with tools." She absorbed this, then pointed to a corner of the foundation where mortar had crumbled slightly between stones. "Is that hurting?" Marcus crouched, examined the joint, took photos with his phone. "That's normal aging, like when your baby teeth got loose. The house is just getting ready for a small repair, not a big surgery." Claire wrote this down verbatim, and he caught her smile when she thought he wasn't looking. By 9 o'clock, Ruby's energy had flagged. Her heart monitor showed elevated rate, nothing dangerous but enough to signal she needed rest. Claire offered to take her inside, set her up with drawing supplies in the library. Marcus watched them walk back to the house, his daughter's small hand tucked into Claire's larger one, and felt something shift in his chest. Permission, maybe. Or recognition that loneliness wasn't a virtue and Ruby needed to see what healthy connection looked like between adults who chose each other. He returned to work with renewed focus, crawled back into the basement, this time with a mission. He needed to document not just the absence of failure but the presence of excellence. Founded in the joinery where beams met posts, in the way the foundation stones had been laid to shed water rather than collect it, in the ventilation system that predated modern building codes but somehow exceeded them. 11 o'clock brought the sound of an engine in the driveway. Marcus emerged from the crawl space to find a white panel van parked beside his truck. The logo on the side read, "Sutton and Associates, Legal Services." 2 men climbed out. One wore a suit despite the weekend. The other carried a camera and what looked like moisture detection equipment. Marcus recognized the type immediately. The suit was a lawyer, probably an associate sent to document whatever the other man found. The other man was Kyle Hammond, had to be. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, wearing jeans and a polo shirt with a structural engineering firm's logo embroidered on the chest. He moved with the careful entitlement of someone who'd learned to confuse credentials with competence. Claire appeared from the house, her posture shifting into something defensive. "Mr. Sutton didn't mention he was sending anyone today." The lawyer produced a phone, tapped at the screen, held it up to show an email. "Property inspection scheduled for Saturday, November 2nd, 10 a.m. We're early." Marcus checked his watch. 10:40. They weren't early. They were exactly on time for an appointment Claire apparently hadn't known existed. Hammond approached with his hand extended, professional smile in place. "Kyle Hammond, P.E. You must be the engineer Ms. Hartford hired. Marcus Bennett, right?" Marcus shook the offered hand, felt the man's grip test his, the subtle dominance play that insecure men deployed like parlor tricks. "That's right." "Great house. Real piece of history. Shame about the foundation issues." "What foundation issues?" Hammond's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The settlement, the moisture intrusion, the load-bearing wall deflection. I documented everything in my preliminary report. Marcus pulled his tablet from his bag, called up the photos he'd taken, measurements he'd logged. Funny thing about that, I measured 0.3 inches of settlement on the northeast corner. Your report claims 6 inches. That's a 20-fold discrepancy. Care to explain the math? The lawyer stepped forward, his voice carrying the rehearsed authority of someone paid to intimidate. Mr. Hammond's credentials speak for themselves. 15 years of experience, state certification, member in good standing with the National Society of Professional Engineers. Credentials don't make measurements accurate. Physics does. And physics says 6 inches of settlement would create visible damage throughout the structure. Doors wouldn't close, windows would crack, floors would slope. I've been through every room in this house. None of that exists. Hammond's expression hardened. Maybe you missed something. Maybe your equipment isn't calibrated properly. Maybe you never actually inspected this property. The words dropped into silence. The lawyer's hand moved toward his phone. Hammond's face flushed red. That's a serious accusation. Marcus tapped his tablet screen, pulled up a photo of the basement's northeast corner. Your report says the foundation shows active moisture intrusion with visible mold growth. This photo was taken 90 minutes ago. No mold, no moisture above 12%, which is normal for this climate. You want to tell me how mold disappeared between your inspection and mine? Environmental conditions change. Not that fast, not without remediation, and there's no sign remediation was ever performed. The lawyer cleared his throat, recalibrating strategy. Regardless of discrepancies, we're here to conduct our own assessment. Ms. Hartford will need access to all areas of the property. Claire's voice came cold enough to frost glass. No. I'm sorry? You heard me. No. You had your chance to schedule an inspection through proper channels. Showing up unannounced on a Saturday morning with a forged email isn't proper channels. The lawyer's phone came up, screen glowing. This email is from your own administrative assistant, Ms. Hartford, sent Thursday afternoon confirming today's appointment. Then my assistant made an error, or someone made it for her. Either way, you're trespassing. You have 30 seconds to leave my property. Hammond stepped closer, his voice dropping to the register men used when they wanted to sound reasonable while being threatening. Claire, be smart about this. The board meeting is Monday morning. You need this inspection to happen. Fighting us just makes you look obstinate. I'm not Claire to you, Mr. Hammond. I'm Ms. Hartford, and I have an engineer performing a thorough, documented inspection. Your presence is neither required nor welcome. Marcus watched the exchange with growing respect. The Ice Queen who'd hired him yesterday had thawed enough to show Ruby kindness, but she still knew how to weaponize cold when the situation called for it. The lawyer made a note on his phone, his movements precise and performative. We'll inform Mr. Sutton that you refused inspection. The board will be very interested to hear you're obstructing due diligence. The board will be more interested in why Sutton and Associates sent engineers to inspect property without owner consent. That's trespassing. Possibly breaking and entering if you touched anything. We haven't touched anything. Then you haven't inspected anything either, which makes your presence here purely harassment. She pulled her own phone out, finger hovering over the screen. I can call the sheriff's office, explain that my ex-fiancé is using his law firm to intimidate me, see how long it takes them to arrive. The lawyer and Hammond exchanged glances. Some unspoken calculation passed between them. Hammond shrugged, turned toward the van. Your funeral, Claire. When that house collapses, don't say we didn't warn you. They drove away trailing gravel dust and the particular kind of rage men felt when women refused to comply. Marcus waited until the engine sound faded before speaking. That email was real. Claire nodded, her hands shaking slightly now that the confrontation had ended. Someone in my office scheduled it without telling me. Either Derek has an ally on my staff or he has access to my systems. That's corporate espionage. That's Derek. He plays every angle, legal, illegal, somewhere in between, whatever gets him what he wants. Ruby appeared on the porch, her small face anxious. "Daddy, why were those men yelling?" Marcus crossed to her, lifted her into his arms despite the fact that she was getting too big for it. "They weren't yelling, baby, just talking loud. Everything's okay. The man with the camera looked mean, like the villain in my books." Claire climbed the steps, stood beside them, her hand coming to rest on Ruby's back in a gesture that looked almost maternal. "He's not a villain, sweetie, just someone who made bad choices. Isn't that what villains are? People who make bad choices?" The simple wisdom of it silenced them both. Marcus set Ruby down, watched her process the adult world through her 6-year-old filters. Claire knelt to eye level. "You're absolutely right, and do you know what beats villains? Heroes? Truth. When you tell the truth and you're brave about it, the villains always lose eventually." Ruby considered this, then reached out and touched Claire's face with one small hand. "You were brave just now. You told them the truth." Something crumpled in Claire's expression. She pulled Ruby into a hug, quick and fierce, then released her just as fast, standing with movements that suggested she was afraid of what she might feel if she held on too long. Marcus guided Ruby back inside, settled her with juice and crackers, then returned to where Claire stood in the driveway staring at the lake. "You okay?" "Derek knows I hired you. He knows you're finding evidence that contradicts his report. That's why he sent Hammond today, to see what you'd discovered, to figure out how to counter it." "Let him try. I have measurements, photos, documentation from your grandfather's original plans. Hammond has lies in a forged inspection report." Claire turned, and in daylight he saw details he'd missed in last night's lantern glow. Lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of stress, carried long enough to etch itself into skin. The particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles alone, but also strength in the set of her jaw, determination in the way she held her shoulders. "I need to tell you something. About Derek. About why he's doing this." They sat on the porch steps close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The lake stretched before them, gray water slowly settling after the storm's assault. "We met at a preservation conference 5 years ago. He was representing a client trying to block landmark designation on a building they wanted to demolish. I was arguing for protection. We were on opposite sides, but he was charming, persuasive. Made me believe we wanted the same things, just had different strategies for achieving them." She paused, picking at the hem of her sweater. "We dated for 3 years. He proposed last November, right after my grandfather died, said we should merge the companies, combine resources. I said no to the marriage, but agreed to explore the business partnership. That's when I saw his real plan. He wanted to liquidate Hartford Properties' historic portfolio, use the capital to fund luxury developments, strip mine everything my grandfather built for quick profit." Marcus had seen this pattern before, in Boston, before Linda got sick. Corporate raiders who understood price but not value, who could calculate return on investment but couldn't measure what was lost when you erased history. "You ended it. I ended it. Told him I wouldn't betray my grandfather's legacy. Derek took it as a challenge. Spent the next year trying to convince me I was being emotional, impractical. When I wouldn't budge, he shifted tactics, started cultivating relationships with board members, positioning himself as the rational voice against my sentimental attachment. And the lakehouse became the symbol, the ultimate test. If he can force me to demolish this place, he proves I can't protect anything. If he can make me destroy what my grandfather built with his own hands, he wins completely." Marcus studied the house behind them, saw it with fresh context. Not just a building, a battlefield, the physical manifestation of a war between two philosophies about what mattered and why. "He's not going to win." "You sound very sure." I am sure. Because he's fighting with lies and I'm fighting with physics. And physics doesn't care about charm or money or how many board members you've bought drinks. It just is. Immutable. Honest. Claire's hand found his on the step between them. The touch was brief, tentative, but it carried weight beyond its duration. Thank you for staying, for caring about this. I care about a lot of things: truth, craftsmanship, people who fight for what they believe in even when it would be easier to surrender. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that somewhere between burnt toast and bedtime stories and watching her stand up to Hammond, he'd started seeing her as more than a client. But Ruby's voice called from inside, needing him, and the moment fragmented into the practical demands of fatherhood. The afternoon became a rhythm of work and interruption. Marcus would disappear into some corner of the house with his tools and come back an hour later with new data. Claire made sandwiches that were only slightly less burned than the morning toast. Ruby drew pictures that gradually evolved from lady with no smile to lady teaching daddy's daughter how to make lunch. By 3 o'clock, Marcus had documented every load-bearing wall, every structural element, every joint and connection that mattered. His tablet held 300 photos, 50 pages of measurements, thermal scans that proved the house was managing moisture exactly as designed. He had enough evidence to write a report that would end Hammond's career, if Hammond had any professional integrity to protect. He found Claire and Ruby in the sunroom, engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about purple crayons. It's not just for sad things, Miss Claire. Purple can be for happy memories too, like remembering good times with people who left. Claire held a purple crayon like she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Ruby had given her paper, was encouraging her to draw something. I don't know what to draw. Draw your grandfather. Draw something that makes you think of him. Claire's hand moved across the paper in hesitant strokes. What emerged was crude but recognizable. A tall man standing beside a small girl, both looking at a house. The figures were stick simple, but the house showed surprising detail. Windows, a porch, a turret. Ruby studied the drawing seriously. That's good. That's a happy, sad memory. Those are the best kind because they mean the person mattered enough to miss. Claire set down the crayon, pulled Ruby into her lap without seeming to realize she'd done it, and let tears fall into the child's hair. Marcus stood in the doorway, giving them privacy, marveling at his daughter's gift for finding the exact right words to crack open hearts that had learned to hide behind walls. When Claire finally looked up and saw him watching, she didn't pull away or apologize, just met his eyes with an expression that said she understood something had shifted between all of them. I need to start the report. His voice came rougher than intended. It's going to take hours. You two should eat dinner without me. Ruby disentangled herself from Claire's arms, crossed to Marcus with the focused purpose she got when she had something important to say. Daddy, Miss Claire doesn't know how to make dinner. Can you teach her like Mommy taught you? The request landed with the force of permission wrapped in need. Linda teaching him to cook had been one of their rituals, her way of making sure he could care for Ruby when she was gone. The thought of passing that forward, of teaching someone else the same skills, felt both terrifying and necessary. I can do that, if Miss Claire wants to learn. Claire stood, wiped her eyes, and nodded. I'd like that very much. They assembled ingredients in the kitchen while Marcus set up his laptop at the island. The report would have to be perfect, technically unassailable, clear enough for non-engineers to understand, but detailed enough that Hammond couldn't find gaps to exploit. He worked while Claire and Ruby attempted spaghetti sauce from canned tomatoes and dried herbs. The process devolved into chaos almost immediately. Claire didn't know you had to drain the tomatoes first. Ruby added too much oregano. The sauce boiled over twice, painting the stovetop red, but they laughed. That was the thing Marcus noticed. Claire, who'd been ice and efficiency when they met, laughed at the mess. Let Ruby stand on a stool to stir, asked questions like she actually wanted to learn rather than just accomplish the task. Marcus typed between glances at the domestic scene unfolding beside him. His structural analysis took shape in precise engineering language, each claim backed by photographic evidence, each measurement cross-referenced to building codes and industry standards. He called out Hammond's falsifications point by point, using Hammond's own words as the rope to hang him. Dinner happened around 7. The sauce was too thick and undersalted, but Ruby declared it delicious. Claire seemed genuinely pleased with herself for having produced something edible. They ate by candlelight because the power still hadn't returned, and somewhere between clearing plates and making tea, the conversation shifted. "Tell me about Linda." Claire's voice was gentle, genuinely curious rather than politely interested. "Ruby said she was an artist?" Marcus found himself talking about meeting Linda at a museum fundraiser in Boston, about her passion for historical preservation, how she'd convinced him that engineering wasn't just about new construction, but about respecting what had been built before, about the cancer diagnosis that came 2 weeks after Ruby's 3rd birthday. She fought for 2 years, wanted to see Ruby start kindergarten, made it to the first day of school, then went downhill fast. At the end, she made me promise 2 things: that I'd make sure Ruby knew her, and that I'd let myself be happy again. Ruby's head rested on his shoulder, heavy with the weight of sleep she was fighting to delay. "Mommy told me to take care of Daddy. Said he'd forget to be happy if someone didn't remind him." Claire's eyes glistened in the candlelight. "She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman." She was. Ruby's living proof of that. The quiet that followed felt sacred somehow. 3 people who'd all lost someone, sitting in a house that had survived its own storms, learning that grief and hope weren't opposites but companions. Ruby finally surrendered to exhaustion around 8:30. Marcus carried her upstairs, tucked her in, and returned to find Claire had cleaned the kitchen with the meticulous attention she probably brought to boardroom negotiations. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. It felt good, normal." She dried her hands on a towel, folded it with precise corners. "I can't remember the last time I did something just because it felt good rather than because it accomplished a goal." Marcus returned to his laptop, to the report that had grown to 32 pages and still wasn't finished. Claire settled on the stool beside him, reading over his shoulder, asking questions that showed she understood more about engineering than he'd expected. "This section about the foundation bearing capacity. Can you explain that in simpler terms, for when I have to present this to the board?" He walked her through the calculations, showed her how the house's foundation exceeded modern requirements by a factor of 3, how the joists were engineered to carry loads they'd never experience, how every element of the structure demonstrated not just adequacy but excellence. "Your grandfather built this house to last centuries, Claire. Not decades. Centuries, that's not sentiment. That's math." She studied the numbers, the photos, the irrefutable evidence of quality. "Derek's going to argue you're biased, that I hired you so you told me what I wanted to hear. Let him argue it. I'll present my measurements in court if necessary. Let Hammond explain why his equipment found 6 inches of settlement that doesn't exist, why his report claims mold that isn't there, why his structural analysis violates basic physics. You'd testify?" "I'd do more than testify. I'd stake my professional license on this report because it's true, and truth is the only currency that matters in engineering." Claire reached across the space between them, took his hand in both of hers. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. You hired me to do a job. I'm doing it. No, you're doing more than that. You're teaching my daughter to draw happy, sad memories. You're showing me that being alone isn't the same as being strong. You're making me believe that maybe Derek doesn't get to win just because he's willing to cheat." Marcus turned his hand in hers, threading their fingers together, feeling the calluses on her palms that suggested she wasn't just a boardroom executive but someone who worked with her hands when the situation called for it. "Claire, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." "I'm attracted to you. Have been since you stood up to Hammond this morning. Probably before that, if I'm honest. But I don't do casual. Ruby's watching, learning what healthy relationships look like. If I'm going to pursue you, I need to know you're serious. That you're not just grateful or scared or looking for someone to lean on during a crisis." She didn't pull away, didn't deflect, met his eyes with the same directness she'd brought to their first conversation. I'm terrified. I haven't let anyone close in years. Derek convinced me that vulnerability was weakness and independence was strength. But watching you with Ruby, seeing how you show up even when it's hard, how you fight for things that matter, you're showing me I had it backward. That real strength is letting people see you scared and trusting them to stay anyway. Say it again. The words came from somewhere deep in Marcus's chest, from the part of him that had learned to demand honesty even when it hurt. Look at me and say what you want, not what you think I want to hear, what you actually want. Claire's hands tightened on his. I want this. You, Ruby. A life that isn't just empty achievement and proving myself to people who'll never think I'm enough. I want to learn how to cook terrible spaghetti sauce and read bedtime stories with voices and remember what it feels like to smile for real instead of performing competence. You understand what you're asking for? I'm a package deal. Me and Ruby, no separation. You take one, you get both. And she comes first, always. No negotiation on that. I wouldn't want it any other way. The kiss happened without planning. Marcus leaned forward and Claire met him halfway, and their mouths found each other with the tentative exploration of people who'd forgotten how this worked. It wasn't desperate or urgent, just honest. Two people acknowledging possibility and choosing to pursue it despite all the logical reasons to maintain distance. When they broke apart, Claire's cheeks were flushed, her breathing unsteady. I should let you work. Stay, I write better with company. She stayed, settled beside him with her own laptop, working on something involving quarterly projections and board presentations while he finished documenting structural integrity. The silence between them held comfortable weight, broken only by typing and the occasional question when one needed the other's perspective. Midnight arrived without fanfare. Marcus saved the completed report, 43 pages of engineering analysis that would either save Claire's company or end his career if Hammond had more influence than integrity. It's done. Claire looked up from her spreadsheets. Can I read it? He turned the laptop toward her, watched her face as she absorbed the technical language, the careful dismantling of Hammond's lies, the build-out of evidence that proved not just safety, but excellence. When she finished, tears tracked down her cheeks. My grandfather would have loved this. The precision, the respect for what he built, the refusal to accept lies just because they're convenient. He built something worth protecting, that deserves documentation that matches the quality of the work. Claire closed the laptop, stood, and Marcus stood with her. They faced each other in the kitchen, lit by battery lanterns while the house creaked and settled around them. Derek's going to fight this. Bring in his own experts. Claim you're incompetent or biased or both. Let him. I have measurements. He has lies. Physics wins. You sound very confident. I am confident, not because I'm arrogant, because I'm right, and I can prove it. She reached up, touched his face with a gentleness that contradicted her reputation as an ice queen. Thank you for seeing me, the real me, not the performance I've been giving for so long I almost forgot it wasn't real. Marcus covered her hand with his. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with Ruby, for showing her that strong women can also be kind. They stood that way for a long moment, breathing together until Claire's phone shattered the peace. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and her expression hardened. It's Derek. Answer it. Let's see what he knows. She swiped to accept, put it on speaker. Derek Sutton's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and urbane and carrying threat under polish. Claire, I heard you had visitors today. I had trespassers. They left when asked. Kyle said you refused inspection. That's going to look very bad to the board on Monday. Kyle showed up unannounced after falsifying an appointment. That's going to look very bad to the Vermont State Engineering Board when I file my complaint. Silence stretched across the line. When Derek spoke again, the smooth was gone, replaced by something sharper. You're making a mistake. Fighting this. You can't win. The board is on my side. The numbers don't work for independent preservation. Hartford Properties needs to evolve or die. My grandfather built something worth preserving. I'm going to preserve it. Your grandfather built a company that's bleeding money. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Claire. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Marcus leaned toward the phone. This is Marcus Bennett, structural engineer. I've completed a full inspection of the lakehouse property. Want to hear what I found? Derek's pause carried weight. I don't know who you are, Mr. Bennett, but this doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. I'm filing a formal challenge to Kyle Hammond's inspection report, citing falsified measurements, fraudulent claims, and professional misconduct. The evidence will be submitted to the county engineering office Monday morning. That's a bold accusation. That's a factual statement. Hammond claimed 6 inches of foundation settlement. I measured 0.3. Hammond claimed active mold growth. I found none. Hammond claimed load-bearing wall failure. I documented structural integrity that exceeds modern code by 300%. So either his equipment is catastrophically broken or he never actually inspected the property. Either way, his report is worthless. The silence this time felt different, dangerous, like Derek was recalculating odds and not liking the results. Claire, we should talk, privately, without interference from third parties you've known for less than 48 hours. Marcus isn't interference. He's the engineer I hired to document truth, something you seem to have trouble recognizing. I'll see you Monday morning, 8 a.m. County Courthouse. Bring your engineer if you want. Bring witnesses. Bring whatever makes you feel brave. But you will show up, and you will face reality. The call ended. Claire set down her phone with shaking hands. He's going to bring everything he has, legal precedent, expert testimony, board votes already locked in. This isn't going to be a simple inspection review. It's going to be a war. Marcus pulled her close, felt her trembling against him. Then we go to war, with truth as our weapon and physics as our shield, and we win. Not because we're ruthless, because we're right. She pulled back enough to look at him, searching his face for certainty. How are you so calm? Because I've already lost the thing I was most afraid of losing. Linda, my old life, the future we planned. When you survive that, corporate lawyers stop being scary. They're just noise. And noise doesn't change facts. Claire's hands fisted in his shirt. I'm still scared. Good. Fear means you care. Means this matters. Just don't let fear make you back down from fights worth having. She nodded against his chest, and they stood that way until her breathing steadied. When she finally stepped back, her eyes held something harder than they had before. Not ice. Tempered steel. Monday morning, County Courthouse, 8 a.m. We show them what truth looks like. We show them what truth looks like, Marcus confirmed. They climbed the stairs together, pausing outside their respective rooms. Claire caught his hand. Stay with me. Tonight. I don't want to be alone. Marcus thought of Ruby sleeping down the hall, of the message it would send, of Linda's voice in his memory saying that showing his daughter healthy love meant letting her see vulnerability and trust between adults who chose each other. Let me check on Ruby first. His daughter slept deep, elephant clutched tight. He adjusted her covers, whispered the nightly words, then followed Claire to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. They lay together on top of the covers, fully clothed, his arm around her shoulders while she curled against his chest. No urgency, no expectation, just the simple comfort of not facing the dark alone. Tell me something true, Claire whispered. Something you've never told anyone else. Marcus thought about walls and what it cost to maintain them. I'm terrified I'm going to fail Ruby. That I'm not enough to be both parents. That she'll grow up and realize I couldn't give her everything Linda would have. That my best wasn't actually good enough. Claire's hand found his in the darkness. Your best is extraordinary. Ruby knows that. Everyone who meets you knows that. Maybe it's time you knew it too. They fell asleep that way, holding each other against the weight of battles coming and losses survived. while the house that had stood for 140 years settled into its foundations and held them safe through one more night. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline light that followed storms. Everything washed clean and sharp-edged. Marcus woke to find Claire already gone from the bed, the sheets cool where she'd been. He checked his phone. 6:43. The county courthouse opened at 8 Monday morning. 25 hours to prepare for a battle that would determine whether truth still mattered when money wanted something badly enough. Ruby stood at the window of her room when he looked in, still in her pajamas, purple crayon in hand. "Morning, Daddy. I'm drawing the sunrise. Miss Claire said it's pretty after storms." "Where is Miss Claire?" "Downstairs. She's making coffee, or trying to. The machine is beeping at her." Marcus found Claire in the kitchen, glaring at an espresso maker that apparently required an engineering degree to operate. She wore jeans and a sweater that had probably cost more than his truck payment, but her feet were bare and her hair was loose, and she looked nothing like the ice queen who'd hired him. "It keeps saying descale. I don't know what that means." He guided her through the process, their hands brushing as he showed her which buttons to press. The coffee that emerged was strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it like it was exactly what she needed. "I've been thinking about tomorrow, about what Derek will bring. He won't just challenge your report, he'll challenge you. Your credentials, your motives, your relationship with me." Marcus poured his own coffee, watched steam rise in the morning light. "Let him. My credentials speak for themselves, my motives are transparent, and my relationship with you is nobody's business but ours. The board will make it their business. Derek will frame it as bias, as me manipulating you or you manipulating me, as anything except what it actually is." "Which is what, exactly?" Claire set down her mug, turned to face him directly. "Two people who found each other at the right time, who see each other clearly enough to choose each other anyway." Ruby appeared in the doorway, still clutching her drawing. She'd added more purple to the sunrise, making it look almost magical. "Are you talking about dating? Because Daddy's allowed to date. Mommy said so before she died." Both adults froze. Ruby crossed to the table, set down her drawing with the seriousness of someone delivering important evidence. "Mommy told me to make sure Daddy didn't forget he could be happy, that he could fall in love again, that it wouldn't mean he loved her less." Marcus felt his throat close. He'd known Linda had talked to Ruby near the end, had prepared their daughter for what was coming, but he hadn't known the specifics, the permissions Linda had given that he'd been too afraid to accept. Claire knelt beside Ruby. "Your mommy sounds like she was very wise." "She was, and she would like you, because you're teaching Daddy to smile again. Real smiles, not the pretend ones he does when he thinks I'm not looking." Marcus pulled Ruby into his arms, felt her small body trust his strength completely. "You're too smart for 6 years old, Ruby Bean. I'm almost 7, and Mommy made me smart on purpose, so I could help you when you needed it." The three of them ate breakfast together. Eggs that Claire scrambled with surprising competence, toast that only burned slightly, orange juice that Ruby insisted on pouring herself despite the inevitable spill. Domestic normalcy that felt both foreign and essential, like practicing for a future they hadn't quite admitted they wanted. Earl Washington called at 9. Marcus put him on speaker while Ruby colored at the table. "Son, I've been doing some research on Derek Sutton. Man's got a pattern. 3 other preservation projects in the last 2 years where he represented developers trying to bypass landmark protections. All 3 cases, the structural engineers who opposed him ended up facing ethics investigations." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Investigations that went anywhere?" 2 were dismissed. 1 is still pending, but it doesn't matter if they stick. The investigation itself creates doubt, makes you look questionable to clients, damages your reputation even if you're ultimately cleared. So he's going to try the same thing with me. Count on it. He'll file a complaint with the state board, claim conflict of interest, bias, maybe professional incompetence. Won't matter that it's baseless, the investigation will follow you. Claire's face had gone pale. She reached across the table, gripped Marcus's hand. "This is my fault. I brought you into this. I didn't realize Derek would go after your career." Marcus squeezed her fingers, kept his voice level. "He can file whatever he wants. My work stands on its own. Every measurement is documented. Every photo is time-stamped. Every conclusion is supported by physics that doesn't care about Derek Sutton's opinion." Earl's sigh carried through the phone. "You got courage, Marcus, I'll give you that. But courage doesn't always beat strategy. Derek's got resources, connections. He can make your life difficult even if you're right. Then I'll deal with difficult. What I won't do is walk away from truth because a bully threatens consequences." "I know. That's why I'm driving up there. Should arrive around 2 this afternoon. You're going to need backup tomorrow, and I've got enough years in this business that Derek Sutton can't touch me without looking like he's attacking a grandfather." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone in this fight, wasn't asking Claire to trust only him against Derek's entire apparatus. "Thank you, Earl. That means more than you know. Thank Linda. She made you the kind of man worth standing beside. Now let's go prove that integrity still matters." The call ended. Ruby looked up from her drawing, which had evolved into something that looked like 3 people standing in front of a house. "Is that man going to help Daddy fight the bad guys?" Claire answered before Marcus could. "Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Washington is going to help us show everyone the truth." "Good. Because truth always wins. That's what stories teach us." Marcus wished he had his daughter's certainty. But the real world was messier than stories. Truth won eventually, maybe, but not without casualties. Not without cost. He spent the morning refining his report, adding cross-references, anticipating objections, building a document so technically rigorous that attacking it would require either admitting Hammond had lied or demonstrating knowledge of structural engineering that Derek's legal team wouldn't possess. Claire worked beside him, preparing her own presentation for the board. Financial projections that showed Hartford Properties could remain profitable while maintaining its preservation mission. Market analysis proving demand for thoughtful adaptive reuse exceeded supply. Case studies of competitors who'd pursued Derek's strategy and ended up with empty luxury developments nobody wanted. Ruby moved between them, drawing and asking questions and occasionally demanding someone play blocks with her. They took turns. Marcus would break every hour to build towers that Ruby could knock down with gleeful destruction. Claire would read picture books in voices that became progressively more confident, less self-conscious. By noon, the power had returned. The house hummed with electricity, lights blazing after 2 days of lanterns and candles. Claire moved through rooms, checking for damage, finding none beyond the bathroom where the tree had struck. The tarp Marcus had secured held firm. The house had weathered Patricia the same way it had weathered 140 years of Vermont weather. By being built right from the beginning. Earl arrived at 2:15 driving a pickup truck that looked older than Ruby. He emerged with the careful movements of a man whose joints protested age but whose mind remained sharp as ever. He hugged Marcus like family, then turned to Claire with the formal courtesy of his generation. "Ms. Hartford, I've heard good things about your work. Your grandfather had a reputation for excellence. I'm glad to see it runs in the family." Claire shook his hand, something easing in her expression. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Washington. Marcus speaks highly of you. Call me Earl. Anyone fighting Derek Sutton's brand of corruption is on my side." Ruby tugged Earl's sleeve, demanded to show him her drawings. He followed her with the patience of someone who understood that children saw truths adults missed. Marcus watched them settle on the floor together, Earl examining each purple crayon creation with genuine interest while Ruby explained her artistic choices. "She's got your wife's eyes." Earl's voice carried quiet observation. "Linda would be proud of who she's becoming. Linda would be proud of a lot of things." Marcus glanced at Claire, who was watching them with an expression that suggested she was seeing family dynamics she'd never experienced herself. Probably most proud that I finally stopped being scared. Earl caught the subtext, looked between Marcus and Claire with knowing eyes. About time. Linda told me 3 years ago that you'd need to let someone else in eventually. Said Ruby would need to see what healthy partnership looked like. The casual mention of Linda's intentions loosened something in Marcus's chest. His wife had known, had wanted this. Had given permission he'd been too grief-stricken to accept until a storm forced him into proximity with a woman who needed saving and ended up saving him right back. They spent the afternoon in strategic preparation. Earl reviewed Marcus's report with the meticulous attention of someone who'd spent 40 years documenting structural integrity. He found no flaws, added suggestions for emphasis. Identified the 3 strongest pieces of evidence that would be hardest for Derek to counter. The original architectural plans are gold. Henry Hartford's calculations prove intent. The house was designed to exceed requirements. That's not accident or luck, that's engineering philosophy. Claire produced more documents from her grandfather's files, letters to contractors specifying materials, invoices showing premium pricing for superior lumber, a journal entry from 1884 where Henry Hartford had written about building not for himself but for generations unborn who would need examples of what quality looked like. Marcus photographed everything, incorporated it into an appendix that would make his report unassailable. By 6 p.m. they had a case built on bedrock, physics and history and documentation that couldn't be wished away by lawyers who confused volume with validity. Dinner was pizza delivered from Burlington, eaten around the kitchen island while they rehearsed arguments and anticipated attacks. Ruby fell asleep on the couch at 8, exhausted from a day of being good while adults talked about complicated things. Marcus carried her upstairs, tucked her in, returned to find Claire and Earl deep in conversation. Derek will try to separate you two. Make it look like Marcus is Claire's puppet or Claire is manipulating Marcus. Either way, the goal is to undermine credibility by questioning motives. Claire nodded, her lawyer brain engaging with strategy. So we need to establish that Marcus's findings are independent, that he reached his conclusions before our personal relationship developed. Which is technically true, Marcus added. I documented structural integrity Friday night. Everything after that is just 2 people choosing each other while also happening to be on the same side of a property dispute. Earl's eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd watched many battles. Technically true isn't the same as persuasively true. Derek will make it look improper regardless of timeline. The question is whether the board cares more about propriety or accuracy. The conversation stretched past midnight. They built contingency plans for every attack vector Derek might employ. Character assassination, technical challenges, procedural objections. By the time Earl headed to a hotel in Burlington, they had responses ready for scenarios that ranged from probable to paranoid. Marcus and Claire stood on the porch, watching Earl's taillights disappear down the driveway. The night had gone cold, frost threatening on grass still sodden from the storm. Tomorrow changes everything. Win or lose, nothing goes back to the way it was. Claire leaned into his side, his arm coming around her shoulders automatically. I don't want it to go back. Even if we lose tomorrow, even if Derek gets the board votes, I don't want to go back to being the person I was before you showed up. What person was that? Alone, armored, convinced that independence meant rejecting help and strength meant never showing fear. Marcus turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. You're still strong. Stronger now because you're choosing to let people in rather than keeping everyone at arm's length. I'm terrified I'm going to lose everything. The company, this house, the future I thought I was building. Then we'll build a different future, one where the foundation is people instead of property. Where what matters is who you love, not what you own. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, like she was trying to memorize the taste of hope before tomorrow could take it away. When they broke apart, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I love you. I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably too much. But I love you. The words hit Marcus like physics. Undeniable, true, terrifying in their honesty. I love you too, and you're right, it's all those things. But it's also real, and I'm done pretending real isn't worth the risk. They went to bed separately, mindful of Ruby sleeping down the hall. But Marcus lay awake for hours thinking about foundations and what it took to build structures meant to last. About how the best engineering wasn't rigid but flexible. About how strength came from knowing when to stand firm and when to bend. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Marcus woke Ruby early, helped her dress in the burgundy dress she'd worn to Linda's funeral because she said it made her look grown up. Claire appeared in a charcoal suit that transformed her back into the CEO who ran a multi-million-dollar company. But her eyes when she looked at Marcus held softness that hadn't been there 3 days ago. They drove to Burlington in Marcus's truck. Ruby belted into her booster seat, asking questions about what would happen at the courthouse. Marcus kept his answers simple. They were going to show people the truth about the house. Some people might not want to hear it, but truth didn't change just because people found it inconvenient. The county courthouse occupied a brick building that had probably been impressive in 1920, but now just looked tired. They arrived at 7:45, early enough to claim parking close to the entrance. Earl met them on the steps wearing a suit that had gone out of style 20 years ago, but still commanded respect through its simple dignity. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than Marcus had expected. 20 chairs arranged in rows facing a raised platform where 3 county commissioners sat. A court reporter occupied a desk to the side, and at the front table, already seated, Derek Sutton looked exactly like a man who'd spent his career learning to weaponize charm. He stood when they entered, smiled with perfect teeth, extended a hand that Marcus didn't take. "Claire, good to see you. And you must be the engineer. Marcus Bennett, right?" Marcus set his briefcase on the respondent's table without acknowledging the greeting. Derek's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered through his eyes. "This is going to be difficult for everyone. I hope we can keep it professional." Professional would have been scheduling a legitimate inspection instead of manufacturing a crisis. But we're past that now. Kyle Hammond entered, looking nervous, avoiding eye contact. Behind him came 5 people Marcus recognized from Claire's description of her board. 3 men, 2 women, all dressed like they had better places to be. Their expressions ranged from sympathetic to hostile, with most landing somewhere in the territory of resigned obligation. The commissioners called the hearing to order at 8 sharp. The lead commissioner, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the purpose of the proceeding. Hartford Properties had contested a structural condemnation order on a historic lakehouse property. The county had scheduled an emergency review to determine whether the order should stand. Derek rose to present first, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd argued hundreds of motions. "Commissioners, this is a straightforward case of public safety versus sentimental attachment. The property in question, while historically significant, has suffered structural degradation that makes it unsafe for occupancy. Our expert, Kyle Hammond, PE, conducted a thorough inspection and found catastrophic failure in multiple load-bearing systems." He clicked through a presentation showing photos Marcus recognized from Hammond's fraudulent report. Foundation cracks that didn't exist, water damage that had been staged, deflection measurements that violated basic physics. Mr. Hammond documented 6 inches of foundation settlement, active mold growth indicating long-term moisture intrusion, and load-bearing wall deflection that exceeds safety thresholds by 300%. The house is, in engineering terms, a disaster waiting to happen. Claire's hand found Marcus's under the table. He squeezed her fingers, kept his expression neutral, while Derek built a case constructed entirely from lies wrapped in technical language. "Ms. Hartford has understandable emotional attachment to this property. Her grandfather built it. She spent childhood summers there. But sentiment cannot override safety. The responsible action, the only action that protects public welfare, is to condemn this structure before someone gets hurt. Derek sat. The commissioners looked appropriately grave. One of them, an older man with the weathered face of someone who'd worked construction, frowned at the photos. "Ms. Hartford, you have the floor." Claire stood, her voice steady despite the tremor Marcus could feel in her hand before she released it. "Thank you, Commissioner Davis. I've brought my own structural engineer to contest Mr. Hammond's findings. Marcus Bennett has 15 years of experience in historic preservation, holds active professional licensure in 3 states, and has been qualified as an expert witness in over 30 cases involving structural integrity disputes." She nodded to Marcus, who rose and approached the commissioners with a thumb drive. "This contains my complete inspection report, including 300 photographs, 50 pages of measurements, thermal imaging, and analysis cross-referenced to the original architectural plans from 1882. With your permission, I'd like to walk through the key findings." Commissioner Davis inserted the drive, pulled up Marcus's report on the screen behind her. The first image appeared, the foundation's northeast corner clearly labeled with date, time, and GPS coordinates. "Mr. Hammond claims 6 inches of settlement at this location. I measured 0.3 inches, that's 20 times less than his report states. 0.3 inches of settlement in a structure this age is normal, expected. It represents seasonal expansion and contraction, not structural failure." He advanced through images methodically, dismantling Hammond's claims one by one. The alleged mold growth that didn't exist, the load-bearing wall deflection that contradicted the perfectly plumbed door frames and intact crown molding, the roof truss failure that somehow hadn't produced any visible sagging or stress cracks. Mr. Hammond's report violates basic physics. If the foundation had truly settled 6 inches, we would see catastrophic damage throughout the structure. Doors wouldn't close, windows would crack, floors would slope measurably. None of that exists because the settlement doesn't exist. Derek stood, his voice sharp with objection. "Commissioner, Mr. Bennett is making serious accusations against a licensed professional. Kyle Hammond has 15 years of experience and an impeccable reputation. To suggest he falsified data is inflammatory and unsupported." Marcus turned to face Derek directly. "Then let Mr. Hammond explain the discrepancy. I have photographs time-stamped and GPS verified showing measurements that directly contradict his report. Either his equipment malfunctioned catastrophically, or he never actually visited the property." All eyes turned to Hammond, who'd gone pale. He stood, cleared his throat, looked at Derek for support that didn't come. The measurements were taken in accordance with standard protocol. If there's a discrepancy, it could be due to environmental factors. Soil conditions change, moisture levels fluctuate." Marcus pulled up a side-by-side comparison. Hammond's photo of the allegedly cracked foundation next to his own photo of the same location, taken from the same angle. "These images show the same stones, the same mortar joints, the same proximity to the floor joists overhead, but Mr. Hammond's photo shows a crack that isn't present in mine, taken 72 hours later. Cracks don't heal themselves, which means either Mr. Hammond photographed a different location and mislabeled it, or the crack never existed." Hammond sat down heavily. Derek's jaw clenched, but he recovered quickly. "Commissioners, even if there are minor discrepancies in Mr. Hammond's report, that doesn't change the fundamental concern. The property is old. It requires expensive maintenance. Ms. Hartford lacks the resources to properly preserve it. Condemning the structure allows for responsible redevelopment that serves the community better than a decaying mansion. That's not Mr. Sutton's decision to make." Earl Washington's voice carried from the back of the room. He stood, moved forward with the deliberate pace of someone who'd earned the right to command attention. "I'm Earl Washington, retired state structural engineer. 40 years of experience evaluating historic properties. I reviewed Mr. Bennett's report and conducted my own visual inspection yesterday afternoon. His findings are accurate, conservative, and technically sound." He set a folder on the commissioner's desk. I'm submitting a formal complaint against Kyle Hammond to the Vermont Board of Professional Engineering. His report contains falsified data, misleading photographs, and conclusions that violate basic structural engineering principles. If the county relies on his assessment to condemn this property, you'll be exposed to liability when Ms. Hartford sues for unlawful taking. The threat landed with the force of physics. The commissioners exchanged glances. Commissioner Davis leaned forward. Mr. Hammond, do you stand by your inspection report? Hammond looked at Derek, at the commissioners, at the door like he was calculating whether he could reach it before anyone stopped him. There may have been errors in transcription. The field notes versus the final report. I'd need to review my documentation. You don't have documentation. Marcus's words cut clean through the excuses. You never inspected this property. You wrote a report based on assumptions or instructions or whatever Derek Sutton paid you to produce, and now you're facing a choice. Admit you lied or double down and lose your license when the truth comes out. The room went silent. Ruby's small voice carried from where she sat beside Claire. Lying is what villains do. Truth is what heroes do. You should be a hero. The innocence of it, the simple moral clarity delivered by a 6-year-old, shifted something in the atmosphere. Hammond's shoulders slumped. I didn't visit the property. Mr. Sutton provided the parameters for the report, said it was a preliminary assessment based on prior inspections. I shouldn't have signed it without conducting my own investigation. Derek surged to his feet. Kyle, don't say another word. You're incriminating yourself. I'm already incriminated. At least this way I keep some dignity. Commissioner Davis removed her reading glasses, set them on the desk with deliberate care. Mr. Sutton, did you instruct Mr. Hammond to produce a false inspection report? I provided context from previous assessments. If Mr. Hammond chose to rely on that context without independent verification, that's his professional judgment, not my legal advice. The deflection was smooth, practiced, exactly what a lawyer would say to avoid culpability. But Earl Washington wasn't finished. Commissioners, I have email correspondence between Mr. Sutton and Mr. Hammond discussing payment for the report before any inspection occurred. The emails referenced specific findings Mr. Sutton wanted included. This wasn't professional judgment. This was fraud for hire. Derek's composure cracked. Real anger flashed across his face before discipline reasserted itself. Those emails are privileged attorney-client communication. Mr. Hammond isn't your client. Hartford Properties is, which means communications about defrauding your own client aren't privileged. They're evidence of conspiracy. The board members who'd been watching with detached interest suddenly looked invested. One of them, a woman in her 50s, stood. Derek, did you hire an engineer to produce a fraudulent report to force Claire out of controlling interest? I hired an engineer to assess a property that poses potential liability. If his methodology was flawed, that's regrettable but not criminal. Claire rose, her voice carrying steel Marcus hadn't heard before. You tried to steal my company. When I wouldn't sell myself to you, you decided to take what I wouldn't give. This isn't about the lakehouse. It's about punishing me for saying no. This is about business reality versus emotional attachment. You're not capable of running Hartford Properties without driving it into bankruptcy. I was trying to save the company from your incompetence. Marcus felt Ruby stiffen beside Claire. His daughter's hand shot up like she was in school. That's mean. Miss Claire is smart and brave, and she's not incompetent. She's learning to make spaghetti and read stories with voices, and those are hard things. The absurdity of a 6-year-old defending a CEO against a lawyer's attack broke the tension. Several board members smiled. Commissioner Davis's expression softened. Out of the mouths of babes, Ms. Hartford, based on the evidence presented, I'm denying the condemnation order. The property is structurally sound. Mr. Hammond's report is rejected as unreliable. This hearing is concluded. The gavel fell. Derek stood frozen, calculating his next move. The board members approached Claire one by one, offering support that suggested Derek's influence had been more tenuous than he'd projected. The December 1st vote is going to be very different than Derek promised you, Claire. We've been uncomfortable with his push toward luxury development. Your grandfather's vision deserves preservation. You have our votes. Keep fighting. Derek gathered his materials with movements that suggested violence barely restrained. He stopped in front of Marcus, voice dropping low enough that only they could hear. You think you won. You didn't. I'll file complaints with every engineering board in the Northeast. I'll make sure your name is associated with fraud and bias. I'll destroy your reputation so thoroughly that no one will hire you to inspect a garden shed. Marcus met his eyes without flinching. You can try, but I have something you don't. Truth, documentation, integrity. Those don't disappear when you file paperwork. They just become more obvious by contrast. We'll see. Derek turned to Claire, his expression shifting to something almost pitying. You'll regret this, both of you. I don't lose, Claire, I just regroup. He left. Hammond followed, looking smaller than when he'd arrived. The hearing room emptied until only Marcus, Claire, Ruby, and Earl remained. Ruby tugged Claire's sleeve. Did we win? Did truth beat the villain? Claire knelt, pulled Ruby into a hug that looked like release and relief and joy mixed together. Yes, sweetheart. Truth won. You helped it win. I just told what was real. That's all heroes have to do. Marcus felt Earl's hand on his shoulder. You did good work, son. Linda would be proud. Linda would say I finally stopped being scared of my own life. They walked out into November sunshine, the kind that held no warmth but promised clarity. The board members had scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon, intended to vote on Derek's removal from the firm and reinstate Claire's full authority over Hartford properties. By 5 p.m., it was official. Derek Sutton had been terminated with cause, his share of the company bought out at the minimum allowed by the partnership agreement. Claire stood in the boardroom where her grandfather had once commanded respect and accepted congratulations from people who'd almost let her lose everything. Marcus waited outside with Ruby, who'd spent the afternoon drawing pictures of houses and families and things she wanted to remember. When Claire emerged, she looked exhausted and triumphant and ready to collapse. It's over. Derek's gone. The company is mine. The lakehouse is safe. And us? Marcus asked it quietly, aware of Ruby listening. Where do we go from here? Claire took his hand, took Ruby's hand, linked the three of them together. Forward. Together. If you'll have me. Ruby answered before Marcus could. We'll have you. You're part of our family now. Right, Daddy? Marcus looked at this woman who'd learned to smile again, who'd fought for what mattered, who'd chosen vulnerability over armor. Looked at his daughter, who carried Linda's wisdom and saw truth with the clarity of someone still learning the world. Right, Ruby Bean. Claire's family now. 18 months later, the lakehouse stood restored. Marcus and Claire had converted the carriage house into offices for Bennett Hartford Historic Preservation, a firm that specialized in saving buildings people claimed couldn't be saved. Earl Washington served as senior consultant, teaching younger engineers that integrity mattered more than expediency. Ruby turned 8 the week they moved in permanently, the three of them occupying rooms that had been built to house generations. She had her own space for drawing, a sun-filled room where purple crayons created art that celebrated both memory and future. The company thrived, projects across New England saving structures that deserved preservation, proving that respecting history could be profitable when done with skill and care. Claire proved herself not just competent but visionary, combining Marcus's engineering expertise with her business acumen to build something her grandfather would have recognized and approved. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear. They gathered around the kitchen table where they'd first shared burnt toast and uncertain possibilities. Earl brought pie. Ruby set the table with the careful precision she'd learned from watching Marcus measure foundations. Claire had progressed from burnt spaghetti to an actual edible turkey, though Marcus still supervised the technical aspects. After dinner, Ruby disappeared to her room and returned with a drawing. 3 figures in front of a house, all rendered in purple, but this time she'd added a 4th figure sketched in lighter purple, transparent, watching from above. "That's Mommy. She's still with us, just in a different place." Claire's eyes filled. She pulled Ruby onto her lap, held her tight. "Your mommy was very wise, teaching your daddy how to let people love him again. She taught me too. Said when I found someone who made Daddy smile for real, I should hold on to them." Marcus reached across the table, took Claire's free hand in his. "Are you holding on, Ruby Bean? Forever and ever? Because that's what families do." They sat that way while evening settled over the lake, the house settling into its foundations, holding them safe the way it had held generations before. Outside, winter approached, but inside, there was warmth, connection, the kind of love that honored what had been while building toward what could be. Marcus thought about foundations and what it took to build structures meant to last, about how the best engineering wasn't about rigidity, but about knowing when to hold firm and when to flex, about how truth always won eventually if you were brave enough to stand by it long enough. Ruby fell asleep against Claire's chest, elephant clutched in one hand, purple crayon in the other. Marcus lifted her, carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed in a house built to survive storms. Whispered the words Linda had taught him, the ones that mattered most. "You are loved. You are safe. You are exactly who you're supposed to be." When he returned downstairs, Claire stood at the window overlooking the lake. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Thank you for choosing us, for staying even when it would have been easier to walk away." She turned in his arms, met his eyes with the honesty that had become their foundation. "I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because it was real. Because you showed me that real love isn't about performance or protection. It's about showing up, being vulnerable, letting people see you scared and trusting them to stay anyway." They kissed as snow began to fall, the first of the season, turning the world outside quiet and white. The house stood firm beneath them, built by hands that understood quality, maintained by hearts that understood value. And somewhere above the falling snow, perhaps Linda smiled. Her husband had learned to be happy again. Her daughter had learned that families could grow in unexpected directions. Her wisdom had planted seeds that grew into oak-strong foundations capable of bearing weight across generations. Truth had won, not because it was easy, because people had been brave enough to stand by it, and in the end, that made all the difference.